Hello and welcome back to the Side Quest Sages podcast. My name is Luke Tatum. I am the sage of Waluigi time, and we're starting another game. Now you'll notice immediately that Corey is not with us. The other sage of the Side Quest Sages is missing. I am feeling his absence. We tried to start this episode together, having all kinds of storm-related issues affecting our internet, etc., etc. So not going to give a long technical explanation, but we tried to troubleshoot for, almost an hour. And I'm just going to record this alone, solo. And we'll pick it back up together next week. We're working on some solutions to prevent further issues. But we're going to be playing Golden Sun. And so if you did not join us for a prior playthrough, what we do on these is it's kind of a guided book club format. So imagine we all have a copy of a book. In this case, it is not the instruction book. It is the actual game of Golden Sun. And we're going to play along. So at the end of this episode, I will tell you, okay, for the second episode, play through here. And we're going to get better at this as we go. When we did Chrono Trigger, which if you haven't seen that, go check out our Chrono Trigger playthrough. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I really, really enjoyed that. And for this one, we're going to do a better job of like knowing where to pace it out to. I'd rather have shorter episodes and more episodes than for us to be just trying to cram things in at the end. So Golden Sun, I'm going to be reading from my fact sheet here. So released in 2001, August 1st, 2001 in Japan, November 12th, 2001 in the United States. And this is a later release in Europe. This is back when we had staggered releases a lot more. So February 22nd, 2002 was the European release. And this game is developed by Camelot Software Planning, which we're going to talk a lot about here. And episode 1 of any of these guided playthroughs, I should say, is a dev history. It's what kind of went into the making of this game? What kind of tells the story of when this game released? And this is a special game to a lot of people. It's a special game to me. I have played the hell out of this game. I used to just replay it and replay it and replay it. And I got very fast at replaying it. But this is when I was a child, okay? I don't actually remember all of the story beats anymore. And so it's going to be a nice revisit for me. 2001 was a long time ago. We're looking at the 25th anniversary of this game, right? This is in 2026. And so that is the only release of the game until it got onto Nintendo Switch Online, which it was put on there on January the 17th, 2024. So, before that, you just had to have a Game Boy Advance cartridge. I don't think I have my cartridge, although I might, but I do have my original manual. So Game Boy Advance, Golden Sun, hopefully that's not mirrored. But we're going to be playing the NSO version, the Nintendo Switch Online version. And what I like to do with these is to tell a story of development, kind of set the stage. So there is a common misconception about Golden Sun. This game came out towards the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle and the very, very beginning of the Game Boy Advance's life cycle. One of the reasons that this is such a famous game is because it really showed what the Game Boy Advance could do. It, in much the same way that some of the mainline Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII, completely, just blew people's minds and got them to buy a PlayStation, right? That is part of the story of Final Fantasy, is this partnership with Sony and with PlayStation. And part of the story of Golden Sun is that it just blew people away. And I was one of those people. I was a kid. I'm not good at doing math like this, but I was like 11 or something when this game came out. And at school, it was the talk of the town, right? It was amazing, an amazing looking game. And so, but the Game Boy Advance, I had an original Game Boy, a brick Game Boy, the gray brick with the green screen. And then I got a Game Boy Color and we played the heck out of that. Much smaller, much cooler. We were Pokemon kids and stuff. I know Corey has a lot of history with Pokemon as well, and so a lot of interaction with that small screen, pixel graphics, and that kind of stuff. And then you get to the Game Boy Advance, which today sounds like not a big deal. This kind of stuff. I'm going to read some specs of the Game Boy Advance, but they're not going to sound that impressive. It's a 2.9 inch diagonal reflective thin film transistor color LCD screen with a resolution of 240 by 160. So we're talking about a 160p resolution in a 3:2 aspect ratio. And, this was their first ARM processor, if I'm remembering that correctly. For Nintendo, it was the first ARM-based custom processor that they had for one of their consoles. And, for the size of the thing, it's a powerhouse, okay? Like really and truly, especially 25 years ago. But, nowadays we're all used to 4K and all this crazy stuff, and it just doesn't seem as impressive. But it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. The Game Boy Advance SP, which came out later, had a backlit screen, which is a huge, huge deal. Okay, not to just gush about the Game Boy Advance, but there's this common misconception about Golden Sun that it started out as an N64 game, and then they scrapped some stuff and rearranged things and made it kind of force its way onto the Game Boy Advance. And that is not true. In an interview, the brothers that run Camelot Software Planning, they talk about this, and they said, we were working on a game for the N64, and we had done a lot of work for that, but we scrapped all of it and rebuilt a new game. We built a new game for the Game Boy Advance. And so the story of Golden Sun is a new game built from the ground up to be a handheld game. And that's what it is. So Camelot has never really released anything about that game they were working on. But I don't know. We don't really know. So they switched gears from making an RPG for the N64, and instead they made Mario Tennis for the N64. That's right. Camelot is the same studio that makes the Mario sports games. They have exclusive control over all that. They've made all of those games. And then, that nameless RPG kind of disappears. The two brothers are Shugo and Hiroyuki Takahashi. And so they said that they threw out everything they had worked on up to that point when they started Golden Sun. Golden Sun took about 1 year to make, but they were doing concepts and planning on this game for about 5 years prior. So really it was like multiple years of planning and concepting and ideas kind of being tossed around, and then about 6 months of pre-work, like concepting, really, really alpha stuff, pre-alpha stuff, and then about 1 year of full-on development. But that's actually kind of long for mobile titles. I say mobile. There weren't smartphones really too much at that time. So we're talking about a handheld game. It's kind of a long time for somebody to spend 18 months working on a handheld game. But they really didn't even think of this game, Golden Sun, as being a handheld title. They thought of it as being a console quality ambition, to use their words, that they just put on a mobile handheld platform. So the Game Boy Advance released in March 2001 and in Japan, and then in June 2001 in North America and Europe. And so Golden Sun released just like right at the beginning of that life cycle. And that did have a lot to do with the success. Golden Sun sold over 1 million copies, and the sequel, which we'll talk about a little bit more, also sold over 1 million copies. But the N64 was already around 5 years old. Console life cycles were a little shorter around that time. And the GameCube also launched in 2001. So Nintendo did this crazy thing where it's like, we got a new handheld and we got a new home console, back when they had two separate things, before the Switch came along and unified those two markets for Nintendo. And so Camelot chose they chose to make this handheld game. They wanted to just really, really go to the max on it. And so a big idea behind the creation of this game is the experience of having superpowers. In RPGs, they were thinking, typically you can do all these crazy, amazing things like, summons and awesome magical spells like, a meteor falls from space and blows stuff up. If you've ever played a Final Fantasy game, you know what I'm talking about, like the 3D Final Fantasies, amazingly crazy summons and all this stuff. And then you'll like walk down a hallway and there's a box in your way and you can't do that. Like you just kind of walk into a box that doesn't move. It's like, but I can summon like the literal god of fire, but I can't push this box, right? It's weird. And so the Takahashi brothers, they more or less looked at that and they said, it's like weird, it's weird that you can do amazing moves in battles and then out of battle, you're like completely helpless. So in Golden Sun, the idea is that you have the same powers all the time. To accomplish that, your magic energy points restore quickly just by walking. And some things don't even require energy. I believe it's called EP, although I don't really remember this. It's either MP for magic points or EP for energy points. And you accumulate that very quickly. Some things don't use it at all. You can try using magic basically all the time. You can pop up a menu and you can try to use a move. And it may not work, but you can try to do stuff all the time on anything. It's like, I'm going to try to use this. I'm trying not to use terminology that's going to spoil anything because Corey is going to watch this episode and he has not played Golden Sun, if I haven't already said that. So this is a first-time experience for him. I don't want to spoil stuff. But you can basically use magic anytime, anywhere. And this is still something we see a lot of today as far as the limitations and the kind of artificiality and the like, you can only use your special powers in this one specific circumstance. A game like Tomb Raider or whatever, Uncharted, you have like this yellow paint thing, right? Everybody's heard of this, I think, at this point. The like yellow paint syndrome or whatever. There's a ledge and you can jump on that ledge because it's got yellow paint that shows you that you can jump onto that ledge. But there's another ledge over there and you can't jump onto that one, even though you're an amazing acrobat that can do all this crazy parkour. You can't touch that one because there's no yellow paint on it. You don't need to go there, so you can't. Is kind of how that works, That's really how it is in a lot of these games. I know you know that it's true. And so, the yellow paint thing, sometimes it's a highlight, sometimes it's, in Monster Hunter, like you have these little fireflies, there's all kinds of ways that games have done this. But it's like, you can do something here. It's a big billboard that says, try to use your powers on this spot, right? And it's like it removes your need to think through things yourself. And so it's just because there's no yellow paint. There's no highlight. There's no thing there to tell you that you can do it. Apparently the maps alone, like the world map and stuff, took 6 months of work, which is crazy to me. Golden Sun is technically impressive. And I think I mentioned before, but I was completely dumbfounded by how good this game looked when it came out. I was like, oh my goodness. Like I couldn't wait to play this game. I couldn't wait to see it in my own hand. I was like, oh my gosh, that looks awesome. And it's kind of like a faux 3D camera. Really and truly, it's all 2D. But they have these multiple layers and they kind of do this dynamic camera switching and stuff that just makes it look really cool and really cinematic and epic. And I think that has a lot to do with its success as well. But I mean, it really pushed like how good a game could look on the Game Boy Advance. Even stuff that came much later, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, which I love, some of the other Game Boy Advance Castlevanias and Advance Wars and things that I was playing, like they looked good, but they didn't look this good, Every NPC, another cool, interesting thing here, and every NPC has 2 types of dialogue. And so there's tons of text in this game, like an absolutely ridiculous amount of text in this game. I'm not going to spoil what I mean by that because if you haven't played it, it's kind of a spoiler. But like there are multiple ways that you can have a conversation with somebody, I guess, is how I'll say it. And so there's a lot of text. It's a critical success. It was the number one best-selling game in Japan for 4 straight months, and it sold over 1 million units. Using today's tools like Metacritic, you can go on to Metacritic and you can see a critical score of 91 based on 29 critic reviews. And the audience score is like in the high 80s on Metacritic. Metacritic is not the be-all, end-all, right? But it's a very well-regarded game even today. So let's talk about the Takahashi brothers and kind of the history of Camelot. Because, like I say, they worked on all kinds of stuff. If I look forward in their dev history, they made Mario Tennis Fever, Mario Golf Super Rush, Mario Tennis Aces, Mario Sports Superstars, Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, Mario Golf World Tour, Mario Tennis Open, New Play Control, Mario Power Tennis, We Love Golf, they worked on with Capcom for the Wii, etc. All the Mario Golfs, all the Mario Tennises, that's all them. Okay. But before Golden Sun, they worked on a series called Shining, which Shining in the Darkness, Beyond the Beyond, I believe is part of the same series. Or maybe not. That was an RPG for the PlayStation. I don't know anything about that. But Shining Force, Shining in the Darkness, Shining Force CD, there's Shining Force 2 and Shining Force 3. And the first one, Shining in the Darkness, is like a dungeon crawler, like you move, almost like a wizardry type game. It looks kind of like Wolfenstein in the way where it's, boxy corners and stuff. I don't have a whole lot of experience with those type of games, but like a first-person dungeon crawler where you click forward and you move forward, and you click rotate around and you rotate around, that kind of stuff. You battle monsters and things in there. That's Shining in the Darkness. 1991 is when they made that. And then Shining Force is like a tactical game, like Fire Emblem. And Shining Force 2 and 3 are tactical games like that. So really interesting stuff. They like to write these games themselves, though. Camelot is not a huge studio. And so the Takahashi brothers really are kind of the creative visionaries of the studio. And so they've worked on RPGs and interesting stories and stuff, and then they just get into Mario sports games. But in the 90s, they're working on Shining. They get into Golden Sun, of course, in 2001. Here's my notes on this. So Shugo Takahashi started Camelot Software Planning in 1994. Before that, they were briefly Sega Consumer Development Studio Number 4, or Sega CD4, a division of Sega, obviously. They rebranded in 1991 to Sonic Software Planning. So named after Sonic the Hedgehog, right? But so 1990 is really when they technically started, sometime in 1990. And then in 91, they kind of became Sonic Software Planning. And in 1998, Sonic Software Planning closed. Hiroyuki, the other Takahashi brother, became the president of Camelot. And then the company became an affiliate of Nintendo and has been working exclusively on Nintendo products ever since. In fact, what they're best known for is the Mario Sports stuff. There's 2 of them on the Nintendo 64, which is Mario Golf and Mario Tennis 64. And then they started working on Golden Sun. Now, another famous little thing, Camelot is famously credited with, and correctly credited with, the creation of Waluigi, the kind of dark Luigi character in the Mario universe. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But Shigeru Miyamoto requested Camelot to do this for the sports games because he wanted some kind of counterpart to Luigi, similar to how Wario is a dark counterpart to Mario. And so, Wario was created by Nintendo. Waluigi is who is not a brother to Wario, I don't believe. He's like a totally separate character, and he is created by Camelot Software Planning. And specifically, he was created by Fumihide Aoki. Fumihide. So he worked on the Shining games too. Fumihide did. He's the lead artist for the Golden Sun game. And so he worked on the Shining games, he worked on Shining Force 2, that's where he started. And then he also, an interesting little factoid here, he also concepted a dark Peach character. So kind of a dark sister version of Peach named Wapeach. And that was supposed to be introduced in Mario Tennis as well. You can find his original concept art for this character online if you're interested in that for some reason. And that character was scrapped. It's never been in any Mario sports game, but Wapeach is a thing. If you search for it, there is a lot of fan art of Wapeach. So, whatever. But basically, the key staff is Shugo Takahashi, who's the director for the game. And he was also a producer for the game. And then you have Hiroyuki Takahashi, who's a producer for the game, and also the lead writer for the game. And then another producer, you might know this name if you're a Nintendo buff, Shinji Hatano. He kind of serves as a liaison between Nintendo and some other projects. He's retired from Nintendo now. He retired in 2013, but he's a name that kind of had some involvement with this as well. And then you also, and that's basically it. Fumihide Aoki is the artist that we just mentioned. And then you have the music composer, Motoi Sakuraba. And Sakuraba is a pretty interesting character. He started with Wolf Team. Wolf Team later, oh gosh, I forget what Wolf Team turned into. It's part of Bandai Namco. So Wolf Team started as the developers of the Tales of games. So Tales of Fantasia, Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Vesperia, Tales of Berseria, etc., etc. There's a bunch of them. Tales of Arise. Those games, he started working with them. And in 1989, he became a freelancer. Oh, excuse me. In 1989, he started. And then in 1995, he became a freelancer and he started working on Camelot's games. And he's worked basically with them on almost every game that they've done. But the Tales of games, he continues to work on, and he writes really cool stuff. So Golden Sun was his first time composing for the Game Boy Advance, but he continues to work on music of the Tales of games. He's worked on Dark Souls titles, Bravely Default, Kid Icarus Uprising, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Star Ocean, almost all the Star Ocean games, Valkyrie Profile, many more. He's a really interesting guy. And he has also released 5 albums of his own outside of games and anime. And the first one was way back in 1991. But he writes prog rock. Like, I haven't listened to it. That's something I'd like to do. But you can kind of hear the prog rock inspiration in some of the Tales music and stuff. So I'm sure it's awesome. But that's pretty cool. It's kind of like Darren Korb. Corey and I may do an episode talking about Hades and the music of the Supergiant Games franchises. But, Darren Korb writes rock music. And he also composes for games. And so it's kind of that kind of a thing, I guess, here, which is pretty cool. So those are the key players. I mean, this is not Chrono Trigger with like 45 different really important names that you're going to hear over and over throughout game history. It's really a pretty small group. And I believe the size of the staff, I don't have this note written, but I believe the size of their staff is about 40 people. Or like today is only about 40 people. Camelot's not a gigantically huge team, but they are pretty interesting. And I have some interview clips. So just to kind of help frame again kind of what went into this game and kind of who the people that made it are. So there's a 2001 interview right after the game released, after Golden Sun released. It's with Nintendo Dream magazine, and it's got both of the Takahashi brothers. So they said, could you share with everyone your history and connection with the RPG genre? Hiroyuki says, my favorite 3 Famicom games, of course, Famicom is the Japanese name of the Nintendo, the original Nintendo. So family computer, Famicom. My favorite 3 Famicom games from the early period, the ones that left the deepest impression on me were Super Mario Bros., Dragon Quest, and The Legend of Zelda. all the things we loved about those games when we played them, I think that has exerted a big influence on the games we've made since. There's a sense of respect we're paying to those classics when we design our RPGs. And they, as a follow-up question, say, what was the first game you worked on then? Hiroyuki says that would be Dragon Quest IV. So he actually started in the Dragon Quest world. They press a little bit and say it wasn't on Dragon Quest III because he is credited as being part of the Dragon Quest III team. Hiroyuki says, on DQ3, I mainly did promotion and advertising. Since I was now working with Enix, after all, I really wanted to contribute to the development somehow. I saw it as a unique chance to pay my respects to a game I loved. So I thought long and hard, and what I ended up doing was creating an extremely detailed notebook of all the dialogue, every single line of Dragon Quest III. And I annotated the messages with a sort of flow chart that showed how the dialogue was connected. And this way, you could see where more info might be needed for a certain quest, or whether there were adequate hints and clues. Ultimately, the notes I created ended up being extremely helpful for the development team, and from that, I was given the chance to work on the creative side in Dragon Quest IV. So, if anybody tells you you're like completely obsessive pursuit about some random game is a waste of time, you never know, man. It might really help out the developers, and you might get to work on the next one. Talking about getting into their own games, starting with the Shining series. This is a little later in the interview. Hiroyuki, who is definitely the more talkative of the two, Hiroyuki says, I mean, you had all these popular games. Wasn't the next step forward in gameplay and design obvious? But instead, the majority of games released just tried to imitate the ride. Gosh, I can't speak today. But instead, the majority of games released just tried to imitate and ride the coattails of what was already popular. That was when I started to think, if no one else is going to step up, why not do it myself? I could start a company that was dedicated to creating games that did take that next necessary evolutionary step. That was one of the big reasons I switched over to the creative side. Now, if you are a Patreon member, which you can join us for $3 a month if you'd like to support the channel, you'll also get access to my notes, things like that. We're having a good time over there. You get to help us choose what games are on the next polls. We are going to play both Golden Sun games back to back. Something I haven't mentioned yet is Golden Sun, just called Golden Sun, and then the immediate follow-up, Golden Sun The Lost Age. These were originally planned as one game, but because the Game Boy Advance cartridge was not big enough, they couldn't do it. They had to split it. Now, there is a narrative shift, and the narrative shift was planned from the beginning. It's kind of a technique that they used, from what I understand, in the Shining games before, but there's some major changes from the first game to the second game, and that was all planned to happen in the same game. But, again, they had to split it. So, The Lost Age is kind of necessary. We haven't really played Golden Sun unless we have played both. So we're going to play Golden Sun all the way through, and then Golden Sun The Lost Age all the way through. But for you who are joining us, who want to play along with us, and I would encourage you to do so because this is a real treat of a game, you're going to play through the town of Bilibin. It is the first town outside of where you start. And so do whatever you want to there. You can level up around town, fight monsters. You can talk to everybody. You can play with your powers, whatever you want to do. But that's where we're going to stop. There's a lot of exposition at the beginning of this game. And so I think that's a pretty good stopping spot. I'm trying not to bite off more than we can chew in 1 week. But we will be back again the next week. We will talk about what happened at the beginning, and then we'll set the expectation for the next one. So, I do hope you'll join us. I am just enjoying this podcast so much, and I appreciate all of the comments and all of the feedback and the Patreon members and the people who voted on this game, because remember, this game was chosen by you guys, and that's super cool. Corey will be back next week. If I'm forgetting something for some reason, y'all let me know in the comments. But thank you so much for being here. And, remember to find meaning in the stories that you encounter on an everyday basis. Look for stories all around you. No matter what you're going through in your life, do not give up.